in which our lovers begin to learn the consequences of their actions. Chapter 28. Levine was insufferably bored with the ladies that evening. He was troubled as never before by the thought that the dissatisfaction he now felt with farming was not his exceptional situation, but the general condition of things in Russia, that to establish relations with workers so that they would work like the music he had met halfway there was not a dream, but a problem that had to be solved, and it seemed to him that this problem could be solved, and that he must try to do it. Having taken leave of the ladies and promised to stay the whole of the next day so that they could go together on horseback to look at an interesting landslide in the state forest, Levine stopped at his host's study before going to bed to take some books on the workers' question that Zvyashki had offered him. Zvyashki's study was a huge room lined with bookcases and had two tables in it, one a massive desk that stood in the middle of the room, and the other a round one on which the latest issues of newspapers and magazines in different languages were laid out in a star-like pattern around a lamp. By the desk was a stand with boxes of all sorts of files marked with gilt labels. Zvyashki got the books out and sat down in a rocking chair. "What are you looking at?" he said to Levine, who stood by the round table looking through a magazine. "Ah, yes. There's a very interesting article in it," Zvyashki said of the magazine Levine was holding. "It turns out," he added with cheerful animation, "that the chief culprit in the partition of Poland was not Frederick at all. It turns out—" And, with his particular clarity, he briefly recounted these new, very important and interesting discoveries. Despite the fact that Levine was now most occupied with the thought of farming, he kept asking himself, as he listened to his host, what's got into him? And why? Why is he interested in the partition of Poland? When Zvyashki finished, Levine involuntarily asked, "Well, what then?" But there was nothing. The only interesting thing was that it had turned out. But Zvyashki did not explain or find it necessary to explain why he found it interesting. "Yes, but I was very interested in the angry landowner," Levine said with a sigh. "He's intelligent and said many right things." "Ah, go on. An inveterate secret serf owner, as they all are," said Zvyashki. "Of whom you are the marshal." "Yes, only I'm marshalling them in the other direction," Zvyashki said, laughing. "What interests me so much is this," said Levine. "He's right that our cause, that is, rational farming, doesn't work, that only usurious farming works, as with that silent one, or else the simplest kind. Who is to blame for that? We are, of course, and besides, it's not true that it doesn't work. At Vashoshikov's it works. A mill. But all the same, I don't know what you're surprised at. The peasantry stand at such a low level of both material and moral development that they apparently must oppose everything foreign to them. In Europe, rational farming works because the peasantry are educated, which means that with us the peasantry have to be educated. That's all. But how are we to educate the peasantry? To educate the peasantry, 3 things are needed: schools, schools, and schools. But you said yourself that the peasantry stand at a low level of material development. How will schools help? You remind me of the anecdote about giving advice to a sick man. Why don't you try a laxative? I did. got worse. Try leeches. Tried them, got worse. Well then, just pray to God. Tried that, got worse. It's the same with you and me. I say political economy, and you say worse. I say socialism, worse. Education, worse. But how will schools help? They'll give them different needs. That's something I've never understood, Levine objected hotly. How will schools help the peasantry to improve their material well-being? You say that schools, education, will give them new needs. So much the worse because they won't be able to satisfy them. And how the knowledge of addition, subtraction, and the catechism will help them to improve the material condition I never could understand. The evening before last I met a woman with an infant at her breast and asked her where she had been. She said, "To the wise woman, because a shriek hag has got into the child, so I took him to be treated." I asked how the wise woman treats the shriek hag. She puts the baby on a roost with the chickens and mumbles something. Well, there you've said it yourself. We need schools so that she won't treat the shriek hag by putting the baby on a roost, Zvyashki said, smiling gaily. Ah, no, Levine said in vexation. For me that treatment is like treating the peasantry with schools. The peasants are poor and uneducated. We see that as surely as the woman who sees the shriek hag, because the baby shrieks. But why schools will help in this trouble, poverty and uneducation, is as incomprehensible as why chickens on a roost help against the shriek hag. What must be helped is the cause of the poverty. Well, in that at least you agree with Spencer, whom you dislike so. He, too, says that education may result from a greater well-being and comfort in life, from frequent ablutions, as he says, but not from the ability to read or write. Well, I'm very glad, or, on the contrary, very not glad, that I agree with Spencer. Only I've known it for a long time. Schools won't help. What will help is an economic system in which the peasantry will be wealthier. There will be more leisure, and then there will also be schools. Nevertheless, all over Europe schools are now compulsory. And how about you? Do you agree with Spencer? Asked Levine. But a look of fear flashed in Zvyashki's eyes, and he said, smiling, "Ah, but that shriek hag is excellent. You actually heard it yourself." Levine saw that he was not going to find a connection between this man's life and his thoughts. Evidently it made absolutely no difference to him where his reasoning led him. He needed only the process of reasoning itself. And it was unpleasant for him when the process of reasoning led him to a dead end. That alone he disliked and avoided, turning the conversation to something pleasantly cheerful. All the impressions of that day, starting with the music halfway there, which seemed to serve as the fundamental basis for all that day's impressions and thoughts, stirred Levine deeply. This good Zvyashki, who kept his thoughts only for public use and evidently had some other basis of life hidden from Levine, though at the same time he and the crowd whose name was Legion guided public opinion with these thoughts that were alien to him, this embittered landowner, perfectly right in his reasoning which he had suffered through in his life, but not right in his bitterness against a whole class, and that the best class in Russia, his own dissatisfaction with his activity, and the vague hope of finding a remedy for it, all this merged into a feeling of inner anxiety and the expectation of an imminent resolution. Left alone in the room given him, lying on a spring mattress that unexpectedly tossed his arms and legs up with every movement, Levine did not fall asleep for a long time. Not one conversation with Zvyashki, though he had said many intelligent things, had interested Levine, but the landowner's arguments called for discussion. Levine involuntarily recalled all his words and, in his imagination, corrected his own replies. Yes, I should have said to him, "You say our farming doesn't work because the Mujiks hate all improvements, and that they must be introduced by authority. Now, if farming didn't work at all without these improvements, you'd be right. But it does work, and it works only where the worker acts according to his habits, like that old man halfway here. Your and our common dissatisfaction with farming proves that either we or the workers are to blame. We've been pushing ahead for a long time in our own way, the European way, without asking ourselves about the properties of the workforce. Let's try to look at the workforce not as an ideal workforce, but as the Russian music with his instincts, and organize our farming accordingly. Picture to yourself, I should have said to him, that you do your farming like that old man, that you found a way of getting the workers interested in the success of the work, and found some midpoint to the improvements that they can recognize, and without exhausting the soil you'll bring in 2 or 3 times more than before. Divide it in 2, give half to the workers. The difference you come out with will be greater, and the workers will also come out with more. But to do that, you have to lower the level of the farming and interest the workers in its success. How to do that is a matter of details, but there's no doubt that it's possible. This thought threw Levine into great agitation. He did not sleep half the night, thinking over the details for bringing the thought to realization. He had not intended to leave the next day, but now decided to go home early. Besides, this sister-in-law with her neckline produced in him a feeling akin to shame and repentance for having done something bad. Above all, it was necessary for him to leave without delay. He had to offer the new project of musics in time, before the winter sowing, so that the sowing could be done on a new basis. He decided to overturn all the old management. If you enjoy this format, please leave a like and subscribe and return tomorrow for the next chapter.